Hey YouTube, today I'm doing a quick portrait demo. I have included the reference photo. This is just a study. This reference photo is from Charles Traub. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but he has a series called Lunchtime. He took a bunch of photos of people walking around in the 1970s, presumably on their lunch break. And these are just gorgeous photos. They have that really high chroma 70s saturation. So yeah, I'm just gonna use one of those. And if you wanna see how this comes together, please stay tuned. I will include the reference photo up on the screen for the entirety of the video if you want to compare, paint along, whatever. But yeah, let's just jump in. So I'm starting out with acrylic paint. Something to note about this demo is that it happened over the course of 2 days. Day one, I used acrylic, and then day two, I used oil. You can mix media like this. It's just important to note that you can do acrylic underneath, oil on top, not the other way around. Just important to note. But yeah, I really like this style because I'm not much of a blender, as you'll kind of see as I go through. I really like sort of placing colors down, almost like tiling, like just sort of being really confident, laying down strokes instead of blending to try to create halftones. So that's something you'll see throughout the entirety. Another thing to note about this demo is in addition to it happening over the span of 2 days, I also took about 70 minutes the first day and 100 minutes the second day. I'm a little bit slowed down because I am doing this live on TikTok and Instagram. That's where the recording comes from. So I'm stopping to talk and explain things. I think maybe it would have come together a tad quicker otherwise, but yeah, that's generally about how long a little study like this will take me. So I did the drawing and the what is it called, toning of the canvas with the bright green. I love going with bright colors. Does it make it hard to choose good colors right out of the gate? Perhaps. I mean, the whole idea of toning or prepping your canvas with a color is that you're giving yourself something other than a stark white value, which value is just how light or how dark a color is. And, you know, usually you want to do something kind of earthy toned. A lot of painters will use like a true gray. And that way you can sort of build up the chroma. I don't do that. Just, I think a little bit because I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. And, you know, having to sort of scramble right out of the gate is kind of fun to me. Color is my favorite part of the whole thing. But on a more serious note, I do like starting with a really bright color. You know, something that ideally sort of contrasts with the dominant color palette of the composition. I like starting bright because it sort of forces me to go high chroma right out of the gate. And admittedly, that's kind of hard because with acrylic, something that you're actively fighting is that sort of flat, overly saturated look that acrylic can kind of have. And the best way to combat this is by mixing lots of muted tones and sort of layering and building up form that way. And so admittedly, this is a bit of a challenge. So if you're super duper new and you're really going for perfect representational realism, I may not suggest this. Maybe prime your canvas with a more of a neutral color. But if you're like me and you don't mind kind of being in the weeds with the color, by all means, use the bright color as an approach. So as you can see, I'm laying in a little bit of my background. I really, when I went in, I wanted to focus on creating not only a good portrait, so a real focus on the face, but I really was intrigued by the glasses and sort of how it tinted the top part of her face with this pink color, and I wanted to see if I could play with that. So it's important when you're starting a painting or when you're working on a painting to sort of have your goals. And I say that because if you go into a painting and like your whole goal is to just, I'm using air quotes here, like do a good job or make it look realistic, that's a bit of an uphill battle because not only is that it feels objective, but it is actually pretty subjective on like what a good painting is. But because you can't do everything perfectly, like it was never going to go in and perfectly render the skyscrapers behind this lady. I think it would detract. Would it make it look like I'm both a good portrait painter and a good landscape painter? Sure. But like that need to sort of prove that, I think in a lot of ways can override a good painting. And so something I learned in, you know, pretty early in my art career is like, just kind of pick a thing that you're interested in, maybe a couple things, a dynamic, if you will, and focus on prioritizing that. It also makes the process of painting a little bit more chill because instead of having to rush around the painting, making everything polished, it gives you a lens of which to prioritize things. So, you know, just blocking in the buildings. If I want to go fix it later, I can. I don't end up doing a lot more to the buildings. So clearly it wasn't needed by the end. So anyway, something to take into account. Also, just, I'm always a proponent of anytime I can ask you guys to be kinder to yourself. Painting is a notoriously hard representational painting is it's a very hard practice, right? Like, to get things to look realistic, assuming that you're not just a mega talented person right out of the womb, takes a lot of thinking and processing and skill and time and effort and all that stuff. So if you can kind of cut yourself a break and make the painting process a little bit more enjoyable, I'm a big fan of that. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I am trying to grow. I'm really close, not to get into how the sausage is made of running a social media account, but I'm really close to being able to monetize my YouTube, which would be really helpful, give me a lot more incentive to make more long form content, which is something I'm already actively pretty interested in. So if you could do that, that would help me out tremendously. And of course, if you want more regular updates, kind of see all the work I'm doing, follow Instagram and TikTok. Instagram is where I post all of my finished work. I do roughly a painting a day or close to it, so there's a lot of really great content over there. And on TikTok, I show more process and talk about things in the art world and things I'm interested in, so it's a little bit more informal over there. But yeah, feel free to follow. Okay, so now we're approaching sort of the back half, the last final part of my day one of painting. It's really hard for me to do a painting all in one go. I can do it, but it's tremendous effort. Maybe it's not for other people, but it is for me. And so when I'm painting this, I'm starting to realize, like, this is going to be a 2-day task. I'm going to have to do it in 2 days. So instead of polishing and sort of wrapping things up, at this point, at the end of day one, I'm sort of just telling myself, finish kind of blocking in the form, and then tomorrow you can go in and start to fine tune. So that being said, now we've switched over to the next day. I, off camera, did a little bit of drawing fixing. You can see the green line sort of just ever so slightly moving things around. I don't mind doing that on camera, but it is probably like my mid-painting redraws, which is where I just double check the accuracy of my drawing, is by far the most boring thing to watch. And I was doing this live. It's just like a lot of just staring intensely at my painting and my reference photo, and then sort of measuring things with the dowel rod. And, when I do demos live, people insist that that's not so boring, but when you're filming it, it's just minutes and minutes and minutes of dead space. So I just did it off camera. But the short thing is, what I was looking for is measuring, I had her glasses brim a little bit too horizontal, and it was a little more diagonal. I also had her mouth a little bit lower, and her chin was off. Everything else was pretty accurate, but I corrected those things, and it started to really help with the likeness, which is something I was going for here. I said at the beginning when I was filming this live that I don't mind my paintings having a slightly Alice Neal effect, which is to say, definitely go look at her work, but she's a fantastic portrait painter, mid to late century, 20th century American portrait painter. And what I love about her is she does something that I think is pretty rare, which is to capture likeness, but not be super beholden to the exact proportions of a face. A little bit more akin to what a caricature artist does. That being said, when I was working on filming how to paint portraits for Not Sorry Art School, I actually took an online course in caricature drawing, and it was incredibly illuminating. If you struggle with likeness, let's say you're someone who your proportions aren't ever super off, but you just can't seem to nail likeness, can't recommend looking into caricature drawing enough. You probably don't have to buy a course. You could just read up on it or look into it. But yeah, found that really helpful. But my goal going into this wasn't super perfect accuracy. It was just capturing some of that likeness. And so part of that process is you have to begin to discern where you need to be super accurate to the proportions and where you can kind of exaggerate. So her body proportions are a little exaggerated, right? Her chest and neck are a little longer than they are in life, but I think that kind of added to her like stature and sort of her presence. So I kept it. And I believe her mouth was ever so slightly exaggerated. And I feel like instead of that taking from her likeness, it sort of added to her expression. But, it's a capturing likeness is, not for everyone, I suppose. But for me, it's sort of been the last part of figure painting that's really started to gel for me. So it's a lot of just kind of guessing and experimenting and figuring it out. You know, maybe it'll become more second nature as I progress, but you know, that's where I'm at now. But yeah, what I'm doing here is, despite the fact that I've moved over to oil, so oil's great because it gives you the capacity to blend where acrylic does not. Not nearly as much. I don't even try to blend acrylic, if I'm being 100% honest. I'm not trying to blend acrylic at all, and I try not to do that with oil also. I'm really just laying down panels, little tiles, if you want to conceptualize it that way, of paint. And, you know, a good example of how I think this can be really effective is, let's take the skin of a more mature person, as we have here. I love painting older faces. I mean, that's not unique to me. I've taken a lot of portrait classes, and a lot of the students agree, the more character your face has, the more fun it is to paint. So, but to kind of get into a more specific example here, you can see there's wrinkles, there's some folding of the skin around her mouth and her jowl and her chin area. And instead of carving out those wrinkles with a line, I find that going in with a little bit of a darker, cooler value and then building up the form. So again, instead of putting the lines down, putting in the lit forms. Basically, the focus is on filling in the spaces between the darker values that I blocked in earlier. And by working kind of reverse of wrinkles, so instead of putting the wrinkle down as like the prominent line, you know, making a face and then just adding lines on top of it, I find that that almost never works. I will lay down a slightly darker, cooler color, and then I will build back the lighter parts where the volume of her skin is kind of protruding ever so slightly between those wrinkles. And I find that this is a much more effective strategy than carving in lines or trying to blend those forms in and be really, you know, finicky with it. So even though I'm painting in oil and I do have the capacity to blend and be a little more precious with the slight shifts in form and halftone, I'm still maintaining a lot of that like bold mark making that I had with the acrylic. It's also why I really value teaching in acrylic. I find that when students when they're starting to paint and they have the capacity to sort of blend the halftones and blend the values in between the lit and dark, that it can very easily turn into a crutch. Not to say that there's anything wrong with blending. I want to be abundantly clear with that. But when you're learning to paint, when you're first sort of understanding how to paint representationally, there is a tremendous amount of value. And I believe two main things. One, it's learning how to blend those halftones. So let's say we're looking at an apple, not just the lit part and the highlight, and not just the shadow and the core shadow, but sort of all the little in between. If you just do a diagonal line on an apple, have light, dark, and sort of blend in between, that might be tremendously easier than finding all those individual values and colors. But you're not going to learn a lot. You know, you're learning to mix a light, mix a dark, and sort of rub your brush back and forth and hope that it looks like a contour. When you really force yourself to look and break down all of those little shapes from the transition of lit to dark, it is harder, but you're developing the ability to more accurately fine-tune and nail those gradual values. And that's just going to transfer everywhere in your painting. You know, I think it's one of the most helpful things you can do as an artist. The other thing, of course, is learning how to color mix. A lot of times when I teach, I will have students who are really into color recipes, which is like, what exact colors are you mixing for her hair? What exact colors are you mixing for her shirt? And I just absolutely never think that way. And some people do, and I'm not saying it's entirely bad, but if a goal of yours is to become very good at being able to mix color and have a good understanding of color, I can't encourage you enough to begin to have a more conceptual understanding of color. And all of this sounds wordy, I know, but what I mean by this, like the praxis of what I'm saying, is to be able to look at her shirt and instead of like perfectly, you know, look up like a recipe for like a raspberry purpley mauvey red, instead be able to sort of just mix it on your own. And I know that sounds really like obvious, but I am always so shocked when I teach in person how much people want to have just the recipe for mauve committed to memory or the recipe for gold committed to memory. And the thing is, mauve in one painting and under one light circumstance is going to be totally different than a mauve in a different situation. You know, this is direct light. If I was painting mauve in like a dark, cool room and shadow, it would just be a whole different color. So learning to sort of mix and respond directly to your reference photo as opposed to having color recipes committed to memory is the other massive piece of advice. And I can go into detail if you guys are curious, like, and you want that further explained. I would love to dedicate a video to it because I'm pretty passionate about it. But as you can see here, the painting is starting to come together. I've really worked hard to save my highlights all the way for the end. I'm a notorious highlight over painter, and I think I held some pretty good restraint here. I'm pretty proud of myself, but this was really fun. I'm always so glad when these come together on camera. It's never a guarantee. If you want to see more up close stills, again, check out my Instagram. I have them saved over there. And thank you for watching this whole video. I hope some of it was helpful. Please leave your questions and comments down below. It definitely will help me to inspire other videos and what you guys are interested in. So yeah, again, thank you. Have a great rest of your day. And yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here.